Good evening, dear listeners. As you settle into your cozy space, I invite you to take a deep breath and let the gentle embrace of relaxation wash over you. Tonight, we embark on a serene journey through time, exploring a unique and perhaps unexpected facet of Viking life, the regulations surrounding the stacking of firewood in their longhouses. This topic, while seemingly simple, is steeped in the rich tapestry of history, and we will unravel its layers together in a soothing, calming manner. Picture yourself in a Viking village, where the sun casts a soft glow over the landscape, and the air is filled with the fragrant scent of wood smoke mingling with the earthy aroma of the forest. The longhouse stands as a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of these remarkable people. It was not merely a shelter but a gathering place, a hearth filled with warmth, stories, and the flickering light of a fire that brought life to the long, dark Nordic winters. As we delve into the history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations, you may wonder why such a seemingly mundane topic deserves our attention. The answer lies in the understanding of how these practices reflect the values and daily lives of the Vikings. We will explore the reasons behind their meticulous methods of stacking wood, the materials they preferred, and how these regulations mirrored their connection to nature and their community. Throughout our journey, we will also touch upon the significance of fire in Viking culture, illuminating how it served not only as a source of warmth and light but also as a symbol of life and continuity. The flicker of flames was a comforting presence, a constant reminder of the bonds shared among family and friends within the longhouse's cozy confines. As we meander through the ancient landscapes of Scandinavia, allow your mind to drift like the soft whispers of the wind through the trees. Imagine the rhythmic sounds of wood being carefully stacked, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the distant call of birds as they settle down for the night. Each detail we uncover will be presented with the intention of soothing your spirit and guiding you towards a restful state. We will also reflect on the communal aspects of firewood stacking, where neighbors would lend a hand to one another, reinforcing the bonds of friendship and cooperation that were vital for survival in the harsh Nordic climate. This sense of unity and shared purpose will remind you of the beauty found in collaboration and the importance of nurturing connections with those around us. As we ease into the depths of this historical exploration, I encourage you to let go of any lingering thoughts or distractions. Allow the calming cadence of the narrative to cradle you gently, as we delve deeper into the world of the Vikings and their longhouses, where every log stacked was a testament to their way of life. So, dear listeners, as we prepare to embark on this tranquil journey, remember that the stories we share tonight are not just about the past, they are an invitation to find peace in the present. Let your body relax, your mind quiet, and your heart open, as we transition into the heart of our exploration. With each word, allow yourself to be enveloped in a soothing embrace, guiding you towards a night of restful slumber, as we uncover the monotonous yet fascinating history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations. Let us begin. The historical account of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations traces its origins to the early medieval period, specifically the late 8th century CE, as evidenced by archaeological findings in present-day Scandinavia. The earliest records of this practice can be found in the annals of the Norse sagas, which, while primarily focused on heroic deeds and voyages, contain tangential references to domestic life, including the organization of firewood within longhouses. The longhouse, a prominent architectural feature of Viking settlements, was characterized by its elongated, rectangular shape, typically ranging from 15 to 30 meters in length and 4 to 10 meters in width. Constructed primarily of timber, these structures featured a thatched or turf roof, which provided insulation and protection against the harsh Nordic climate. The internal layout generally consisted of a central hall with a hearth, where the firewood was crucial for heating and cooking. In the year 800 CE, the first known reference to firewood stacking can be identified in the writings of the Icelandic chieftain and scholar, Snorri Sturluson. Although his works, particularly the Heimskringla, predominantly focus on the genealogies of kings and legendary sagas, he also alluded to practical aspects of Viking life. In his writings, he noted that the proper arrangement of firewood shall be attended to lest the hearth be deprived of its warmth. This early mention suggests that even at this nascent stage of societal development, there was an awareness of the importance of effective firewood management. By the mid-9th century, as Viking settlements expanded into regions such as the British Isles and the Frankish Empire, the need for standardized firewood stacking practices became increasingly evident. The introduction of communal longhouses in these newly established settlements necessitated a more organized approach to firewood storage. The precise stacking of firewood not only facilitated easier access but also mitigated the risk of fire hazards within densely populated structures. During the 10th century, the emergence of local chieftains and the establishment of rudimentary governance structures led to the formulation of administrative procedures concerning firewood stacking. In the year 950 CE, the Council of Uppsala, convened by the regional chieftain Bjorn Ironside, produced a set of guidelines known informally as the Regulations of Hearthwood. These regulations mandated that firewood be stacked in a specific manner to ensure both efficiency and safety. The guidelines specified that firewood should be arranged in a manner that allowed for adequate airflow, thereby promoting optimal combustion. The architectural details of these regulations included stipulations regarding the dimensions of firewood logs. The approved length of firewood was established at approximately 30 centimeters, while the diameter could not exceed 10 centimeters. These measurements were deemed effective for maintaining the integrity of the hearth structure and facilitating the efficient burning of wood. Furthermore, the stacking of firewood was to be conducted in rows, with each row slightly elevated to prevent moisture accumulation from the ground, thereby ensuring the firewood remained dry and suitable for use. In conjunction with the establishment of stacking regulations, daily routines within Viking longhouses began to reflect the importance of firewood management. The routine of gathering firewood became a communal task, often undertaken at the onset of winter. It was not uncommon for entire families to participate in the collection and stacking of firewood, which was viewed as a vital household chore. In the year 975 CE, the Icelandic poet and farmer, Einar Sigvaldsson, documented in his poem, The Wood Gatherers, the daily practices associated with firewood collection, underscoring the labor-intensive nature of this task. Moreover, the practice of monitoring firewood supply became a matter of local governance. By the end of the 10th century, regional leaders appointed designated firewood overseers, tasked with ensuring compliance with the stacking regulations. These overseers, often referred to as wood wardens, were responsible for conducting inspections of communal firewood supplies and reporting any violations of the established regulations. Such oversight was particularly crucial during the harsh winter months when the demand for firewood peaked. The 11th century saw the consolidation of these administrative practices as Viking society underwent significant changes with the advent of Christianity and increased contact with continental Europe. The conversion to Christianity prompted a re-evaluation of communal practices, including firewood management. The introduction of ecclesiastical oversight led to further refinements in the stacking regulations, with an emphasis on orderliness and cleanliness. In the year 1050 CE, the Synod of Trondheim, convened by Bishop Sigurd, introduced supplementary guidelines that mandated the separation of firewood types based on their intended use. For instance, hardwood was deemed suitable for long-term heating, while softwood was reserved for kindling. As Viking society transitioned into the late medieval period, the firewood stacking regulations continued to evolve. By 1100 CE, the influence of external cultural practices began to permeate Viking domestic life, leading to a gradual standardization of firewood management practices across various regions. The influence of the Hanseatic League, which facilitated trade and cultural exchange between Northern Europe and the Baltic region, brought new techniques for firewood storage and preservation. In 1150 CE, the town of Bergen, a significant trading hub, implemented a municipal code regulating firewood stacking practices. This code, known as the Bergen Firewood Ordinance, provided detailed instructions on the proper stacking methods, types of firewood permissible for use within urban settings, and penalties for non-compliance. The ordinance stipulated that firewood must be stacked with a minimum of 15 centimeters of space between stacks to allow for adequate airflow, thereby reducing the risk of spontaneous combustion. Daily routines in urban Viking communities began to reflect these regulatory changes. Woodcutters were now required to register their woodcutting activities with local authorities, creating a ledger detailing the volume and type of firewood harvested. This administrative procedure aimed to prevent overexploitation of nearby forests and ensure sustainable practices. The meticulous recording of woodcutting activities became an integral part of municipal governance, underscoring the growing complexity of Viking societal structures. By the late 12th century, the cultural integration of Viking societies with their European counterparts resulted in a further refinement of firewood stacking regulations. The influence of feudal systems and burgeoning bureaucratic structures led to the establishment of firewood guilds, which provided training and certification for woodcutters and stackers. These guilds emphasized the importance of adhering to standardized techniques and fostering communal responsibility for firewood management. In the year 1200 CE, the Guild of the Stacked Logs, based in the city of Stockholm, published a comprehensive manual titled The Art of Stacking Firewood, which became a seminal text for practitioners across Scandinavia. This manual outlined the historical evolution of stacking techniques, detailed the physical properties of various wood types, and emphasized the significance of maintaining a consistent stacking pattern. The text included illustrations of recommended stacking configurations, providing a visual guide for adherents to follow. As Viking culture gradually transitioned into the broader Scandinavian identity in the subsequent centuries, the firewood stacking regulations persisted, albeit in a more subdued manner. The 14th and 15th centuries witnessed a decline in the strict enforcement of stacking practices, as changes in technology and lifestyle diminished the reliance on traditional longhouse structures. Nevertheless, the foundational principles established during the Viking Age continued to inform practices in rural communities. In summary, the monotonous history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations illustrates a progression from rudimentary practices in the 8th century to the formalized and codified structures seen in later centuries. The architectural details, administrative procedures, and daily routines surrounding firewood management reflect the complexities of Viking society and its adaptation to environmental challenges. As such, the legacy of firewood stacking regulations serves as a testament to the enduring importance of practical domestic management in the historical narrative of the Viking Age. The construction methods and materials utilized in the assembly of Viking longhouses were foundational to the efficacy of firewood stacking regulations, as the integrity of the structure directly influenced the management of firewood resources. Primarily, longhouses were constructed using a combination of timber and sod, with the timber sourced from local forests. The most common species employed included oak, Quercus robur, which was favored for its strength, and spruce, Picea abies, valued for its availability and ease of working. It is documented that from 800 CE to 1000 CE, a typical longhouse would measure approximately 20 to 30 meters in length and 6 to 8 meters in width, allowing for a functional interior space divided into various sections for living, sleeping, and storage purposes. The walls of these structures were often constructed using a technique known as post and beam, where vertical posts were set into the ground, and horizontal beams were fitted to create a frame. The gaps between the posts were filled with wattle and daub, a mixture of woven branches, wattle, and a mud-based substance, daub. This method was particularly prevalent in regions with abundant clay resources. It is noted that the thickness of the walls could vary, generally ranging between 15 to 30 centimeters, which provided adequate insulation against the harsh Scandinavian winters. The roofs of Viking longhouses were typically thatched, employing reeds or grasses harvested from nearby wetlands. The angle of the roof was crucial. Ideally, it would have a pitch of 45 degrees to facilitate the shedding of rain and snow, preventing excess weight from accumulating and potentially compromising the structure. The average lifespan of a thatched roof was approximately 10 to 15 years, necessitating periodic replacement to maintain the integrity of the longhouse. Maintenance procedures for Viking longhouses were not merely a matter of aesthetics but were critical to the efficient stacking and utilization of firewood. Regular inspections were mandated every spring and autumn to check for structural integrity, with particular attention given to the roof and wall integrity. Documentation from the late 9th century indicates that any signs of rot or pest infestation would prompt immediate remedial action, such as replacing affected timbers or rethatching the roof. It was common practice to replace the thatch every decade, with records showing that in 872 CE, a large communal effort was organized in the village of Kvenland to replace roofs for multiple households simultaneously. The financial records relating to firewood stacking regulations reveal the economic implications of maintaining a longhouse. The cost of materials such as timber and thatching materials varied significantly depending on the location and availability. In the year 950 CE, a record from the estate of a prominent chieftain in what is now Norway shows expenditures amounting to 30 silver coins for timber and 12 silver coins for thatching materials. Additionally, labor costs were accounted for. It was recorded that skilled carpenters could command a wage of approximately 2 silver coins per day, while unskilled laborers earned 1 silver coin per day. The allocation of resources was meticulously documented. For instance, in 930 CE, the village of Skyringsel maintained meticulous ledgers detailing the amount of firewood consumed per household. On average, it was estimated that a family of 6 required between 4 to 6 cubic meters of firewood per winter. The records also indicate that firewood was often stacked in designated areas near the longhouse, with guidelines specifying that stacks should not exceed 1.5 meters in height to prevent structural collapse from the accumulated weight. Personnel involved in the stacking of firewood included a designated wood master, a role that emerged around the mid-9th century. The wood master was responsible for the procurement, stacking, and distribution of firewood, ensuring that each household within the jurisdiction received an adequate supply. This position required a thorough understanding of stacking techniques, as logs had to be arranged in a crisscross pattern to allow for proper airflow, which facilitated drying and reduced the risk of rot. It is documented that in the year 1000 CE, the average woodmaster in the region of Ostlandet oversaw the stacking of approximately 150 cubic meters of firewood annually, a task that necessitated collaboration with at least 4 additional laborers. Training for this role was rigorous. Prospective woodmasters were often apprenticed for several years, learning the nuances of species selection and the importance of moisture content in firewood. The average moisture content of firewood deemed acceptable for burning was between 20% and 25%, and the woodmaster was tasked with ensuring that the firewood was adequately seasoned before use. Technical specifications related to firewood stacking were also essential to ensure compliance with regulations established by local governing bodies. A typical firewood stack was required to have a base width of no less than 1 meter and a length of 2 meters, with the aforementioned height limit of 1.5 meters. Stacks were to be constructed using logs of uniform diameter, ideally between 10 to 15 centimeters, to facilitate even drying. Furthermore, regulations mandated that firewood stacks be positioned at least 1 meter away from the longhouse to minimize the risk of fire hazards. It was also stipulated that firewood should be covered with a waterproof tarp during periods of heavy rain to prevent saturation, which could lead to an increased risk of mold and decreased combustibility. In summary, the history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations is marked by a standardized approach to construction, maintenance, financial management, personnel responsibilities, and technical specifications. Each of these facets contributed to the overarching goal of ensuring that households were adequately supplied with firewood, thus sustaining the domestic hearth essential for warmth and cooking throughout the long winters of the Viking Age. Through meticulous record-keeping and adherence to regulations, Viking communities were able to foster a culture of domestic efficiency that remains a notable aspect of their historical narrative. The construction methods and materials utilized in the assembly of Viking longhouses were foundational to the efficacy of firewood stacking regulations, as the integrity of the structure directly influenced the management of firewood resources. Primarily, longhouses were constructed using a combination of timber and sod, with the timber sourced from local forests. The most common species employed included oak, Quercus robur, which was favored for its strength and durability, and spruce, Picea abies, valued for its availability and lightweight properties. The choice of these materials was deeply influenced by the geographical context of Viking settlements, which often thrived in regions with abundant forestation. Viking longhouses typically measured between 20 to 30 meters in length and about 5 to 7 meters in width, accommodating extended families and livestock under one roof. The construction process began with the selection of a suitable site, usually near essential resources like water and wood. Once a site was chosen, builders would clear the area and lay down a foundation of large timbers, often using a technique known as post and lintel construction. Vertical posts were anchored into the ground, supporting horizontal beams that framed the structure. The walls were constructed using a wattle and daub technique, consisting of a woven lattice of flexible branches, wattle, plastered with a mixture of clay, sand, and straw, daub. This method not only provided insulation but also allowed for the effective management of internal temperatures, which was essential for maintaining a livable environment during harsh Scandinavian winters. The roofs were typically steeply pitched and thatched with local materials such as reeds or grasses, which helped shed snow and rain effectively. Historically, the construction of longhouses can be traced back to the early Viking Age, around 800 CE, and continued well into the medieval period, with variations in design reflecting regional adaptations. For instance, archaeological findings from sites like the Viking settlement at L'Anse-aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, reveal longhouses constructed with a unique blend of materials, indicative of both Viking and indigenous practices. The presence of sod roofs in these longhouses suggests a resourceful adaptation to the cold, wet climate of Newfoundland. An interesting case study can be found at the site of Borg, located in the Lofoten Islands of Norway. Excavations at Borg revealed a remarkably well-preserved longhouse dating back to around 500 CE, measuring an impressive 83 meters in length. This longhouse, believed to be the largest in the Viking world, showcases the complexity and scale of Viking building practices. The structure's size indicates a communal living space that may have housed multiple families or served as a chief's residence. The use of timber from local spruce forests and the incorporation of sod insulation exemplified the Viking strategic approach to resource management. In terms of firewood management, Viking households would often stack firewood in designated areas outside the longhouse. Regulations concerning firewood stacking were vital for minimizing fire hazards, especially given that the longhouses were primarily heated by open fires located centrally within the dwelling. These fires not only provided warmth but were also vital for cooking and social gatherings. To ensure a steady supply of firewood, families employed sustainable practices such as selective logging, allowing younger trees to thrive while harvesting mature ones. In the context of firewood stacking, measurements were crucial. For instance, a typical household might require approximately 10 to 15 cubic meters of firewood for winter months. Firewood was often stacked in neat rows, elevated off the ground to promote airflow and reduce moisture accumulation, which could lead to spoilage. The use of tar or pitch from pine trees was common to treat the exterior wood surfaces of the longhouse, adding another layer of protection against the elements and potential fire risks. In summary, the construction of Viking longhouses was a sophisticated interplay of environmental adaptation, resource management, and architectural ingenuity. The effective stacking and management of firewood were intrinsically linked to the structural integrity of these homes, which provided shelter, warmth, and a sense of community. As we consider the evolution of these building practices, it is essential to recognize their legacy in shaping not only Viking society but also the broader narrative of human adaptation to diverse environments throughout history. The construction of Viking longhouses, particularly concerning firewood stacking regulations, provides a detailed insight into the multifaceted aspects of Norse building practices. The methods and materials employed in the construction of these longhouses varied significantly across different regions, yet several constants can be identified that illustrate the adherence to both environmental conditions and societal norms. The primary materials utilized in the construction of Viking longhouses included timber, thatch, and clay. The timber, often sourced from local forests, was typically oak, Quercus robur, or pine, Pinus sylvestris, chosen for their availability and structural integrity. The dimensions of timber beams varied, but a common specification was that the main structural beams were approximately 15 to 20 centimeters in diameter and 6 to 10 meters in length, facilitating the construction of a sturdy framework. The use of large flat stones as a foundation was prevalent, with stones often measuring around 30 centimeters in height. This practice provided a stable base that helped mitigate moisture-related deterioration, which was critical in the damp climates prevalent in Scandinavia. The construction technique primarily employed was a post and lintel system, characterized by vertical posts supporting horizontal beams. This method facilitated the creation of open interiors, essential for communal living and social gatherings. The walls were typically constructed using wattle and daub, a technique involving woven branches, wattle, coated with a mixture of clay and straw, daub, enhancing thermal insulation and fire resistance. The roofs were commonly thatched with straw or reeds, providing effective waterproofing and insulation. The steep pitch of the roof, often exceeding 45 degrees, ensured that rain and snow would slide off easily, preventing accumulation and potential structural damage. Maintenance of these longhouses was critical to their longevity, especially concerning firewood storage and stacking. Regulations stipulated that firewood must be stacked at least 1.5 meters away from the longhouse to reduce the risk of fire. The stacking must also be organized such that the logs measured between 30 and 40 centimeters in length, with a diameter not exceeding 15 centimeters. This size was deemed optimal for both burning efficiency and ease of handling. The logs were to be stacked in a crisscross pattern, allowing for air circulation, which aided in the drying process and reduced the likelihood of mold and decay. Financial records from the Viking Age, particularly from the late 9th century to the early 11th century, indicate the costs associated with timber acquisition and maintenance. A survey conducted in 980 CE revealed that the average cost of timber per cubic meter ranged from 10 to 15 silver coins, depending on the region. In contrast, the costs of thatch and wattle materials were significantly lower, averaging around 5 silver coins per cubic meter. Records show that a typical longhouse required approximately 30 cubic meters of timber, 10 cubic meters of thatch, and 15 cubic meters of wattle for construction, leading to an estimated total cost of 400 to 500 silver coins. These figures reflect a substantial investment for the average Viking family, indicating that longhouses were not only residences but also symbols of social status. Personnel involved in the construction and maintenance of longhouses included skilled carpenters, thatchers, and laborers. Carpenters, known as smør, were typically responsible for the design and assembly of the wooden structures. Their training often began in adolescence, with apprenticeships lasting up to 5 years. During this period, they would learn not only the technical skills required for construction but also the various regulations concerning firewood stacking, which were orally transmitted through generations. The thatchers, who specialized in roofing, were equally skilled, often working in teams to cover large areas efficiently. Laborers, often unskilled, provided essential support, engaging in tasks such as transporting materials and assisting with stacking firewood according to established regulations. Job descriptions were formalized to ensure compliance with building codes and firewood management practices. Carpenters were expected to possess knowledge of local tree species, their properties, and the best practices for harvesting and preparing timber. They were also responsible for inspecting the integrity of the structures over time, advising homeowners on necessary repairs to maintain safety and compliance with firewood stacking regulations. Thatchers were tasked with ensuring that roofs were properly installed and maintained, with specific attention given to the pitch and drainage capabilities. Laborers, while less specialized, were crucial in adhering to the stacking regulations, often monitored by the head carpenter or local chieftain to ensure compliance with community standards. Technical specifications regarding firewood stacking were revised periodically, reflecting changes in societal norms and environmental conditions. By the year 1020 CE, a notable update specified that firewood stacks should not exceed 1.5 meters in height to prevent toppling and ensure safer access for retrieval. Additionally, the diameter of stacked logs was regulated to not exceed 10 centimeters, aiming to improve combustion efficiency and minimize smoke production within the longhouse. These specifications were documented in various local laws, including the Viking Code of Conduct, which served as a practical manual for maintaining safe and efficient living conditions. In 1050 CE, the introduction of a community-wide inspection system was established, whereby local chieftains would conduct annual audits of firewood storage practices. These inspections aimed to ensure adherence to stacking regulations, with non-compliance resulting in fines or communal sanctions. Such measures reflected the societal emphasis on collective safety and responsibility, emphasizing that firewood was not merely a resource but an integral aspect of community health and well-being. Moreover, the regulations regarding firewood stacking extended to the seasonal variations in wood selection. During the winter months, it was mandated that only seasoned hardwoods, such as oak and ash, be used for indoor burning, as they produced less smoke and a higher heat output. Conversely, during the summer, softer woods like birch were acceptable for outdoor fires, as they provided quick ignition and a pleasant aroma. The firewood stacking regulations also included provisions for the types of wood allowed for ceremonial purposes, often dictated by local customs and religious beliefs. For instance, certain woods were reserved for religious ceremonies or feasts, reflecting the intersection of daily life and spiritual practices in Viking culture. In summary, the construction and maintenance of Viking longhouses were governed by a complex web of regulations regarding firewood stacking, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of materials, environmental adaptation, and communal responsibility. The meticulous attention to construction methods, financial implications, personnel roles, and technical specifications underscores the significance of these practices in Viking society. Such regulations not only facilitated the practical aspects of daily living but also reinforced social cohesion and collective identity among Viking communities, ultimately shaping the trajectory of their historical legacy. The construction of Viking longhouses, particularly in relation to firewood stacking regulations, necessitated a meticulous approach to both materials and methods. Longhouses, typically ranging from 15 to 30 meters in length and 5 to 7 meters in width, were primarily constructed using timber sourced from local forests. The predominant species utilized included oak, Quercus robur, pine, Pinus sylvestris, and birch, Betula pendula. The choice of wood was critical, as it not only provided structural integrity but also influenced the efficiency of the longhouse's heating capabilities. The construction process began with the felling of trees, often executed during the late autumn months when the sap was low, thereby minimizing damage to the timber. Logs were then stripped of their bark and cut to size using iron axes, which were commonly available by the 9th century. The logs were assembled using a technique known as the post and beam method, where vertical posts were set into the ground and horizontal beams secured the structure. The average height of these longhouses was approximately 2.5 meters, allowing for ample headroom while maintaining the structural stability required for the harsh northern climates. In terms of maintenance, the longevity of a longhouse was directly correlated with the upkeep of its firewood storage. Regulations stipulated that firewood must be stacked in a manner that allowed for both adequate airflow and ease of access, ensuring that the wood remained dry and free from rot. The recommended dimensions for firewood stacks were not to exceed 1.5 meters in height and 2 meters in width, with a requirement for at least 30 centimeters of space between each stack to facilitate air circulation. Regular inspections were mandated, occurring biannually in the spring and autumn. During these inspections, community leaders, designated as thingmen, would assess the condition of the firewood, ensuring compliance with established stacking regulations. Failure to adhere to these guidelines could result in fines or mandatory community service to rectify the non-compliance. These inspections were meticulously recorded in community logs, which detailed the condition of the firewood and any actions taken. From a financial perspective, the costs associated with firewood stacking regulations were often itemized in local economic records. In the year 890 CE, for instance, the average cost of firewood per household was roughly 15 silver coins, equivalent to approximately 1.5 kilograms of silver. This expense was a substantial portion of a Viking household's annual budget, particularly in regions where firewood was scarce. Additionally, the community collectively invested in maintaining communal woodlands, which were often marked out and regulated by local chieftains to ensure sustainable harvesting practices. The personnel involved in the management of firewood supply and stacking included a variety of roles. Each longhouse typically employed a designated wood master, a role filled by an experienced member of the household, responsible for overseeing the procurement, stacking, and maintenance of firewood. The wood master was expected to possess knowledge of local wood species, ideal stacking techniques, and the seasonal variations affecting wood condition. In larger communal settings, the wood master reported directly to the FYRD, a council of elders who provided oversight and support for resource management. Job descriptions for the wood master were documented, delineating responsibilities that included the monitoring of wood quality, coordinating with local suppliers, and ensuring compliance with the stacking regulations. This role often intersected with other household duties, such as food preservation and livestock management, creating a multifaceted position that contributed significantly to the household's overall efficiency. Technical specifications regarding the stacking of firewood were outlined in various legal codes known as grogas, which were developed during the early medieval period. These codes included specific guidelines on the dimensions and arrangement of stacked wood. It was stipulated that firewood must be stacked in a parallel orientation to the longhouse to minimize the risk of moisture absorption from the ground. Furthermore, the use of wooden pallets or stones to elevate the firewood off the ground was mandated, as this practice reduced the likelihood of fungal growth and insect infestation, thereby extending the usable life of the firewood. In addition to moisture management, the regulations also addressed the type of firewood that was permitted for use in longhouses. Hardwoods were preferred due to their superior burning qualities, providing a longer-lasting and hotter flame. Species such as oak and hickory were particularly favored, while softwoods like spruce and fir were often relegated to kindling due to their rapid burn rate. The community records from 920 CE indicate that a typical longhouse required approximately 10 cubic meters of firewood annually to sustain heating during the winter months. In conclusion, the regulations governing the stacking of firewood in Viking longhouses were not merely a matter of practicality, they were intricately woven into the fabric of Viking society. The methods of construction, maintenance procedures, financial implications, job descriptions, and technical specifications all reflected a deep-seated understanding of resource management within the context of their environment. The adherence to these regulations ensured that Viking communities remained not only functional but also resilient amidst the challenges posed by their geographic and climatic conditions. As such, the history of Viking longhouse firewood stacking regulations serves as a testament to their ingenuity and social organization, with implications that extend far beyond the confines of mere firewood storage. The construction of Viking longhouses, particularly in relation to firewood stacking regulations, necessitated a meticulous approach to both materials and methods. Longhouses, typically ranging from 15 to 30 meters in length and 5 to 7 meters in width, were primarily constructed using timber sourced from local forests. The predominant species utilized included oak, Quercus robur, pine, Pinus sylvestris, and birch, Betula pendula. The choice of wood was critical, as it not only provided structural integrity but also influenced the thermal properties of the dwelling, crucial for surviving the harsh Nordic winters. The Viking Age, spanning approximately from 793 to 1066 AD, saw the height of longhouse construction, peaking around the 9th and 10th centuries. During this period, archaeological findings have indicated that longhouses were often built using a post-and-beam construction method. This involved setting vertical posts into the ground, which formed the main framework of the house. Horizontal beams were then secured to these posts, creating a sturdy skeleton to which the walls and roof could be attached. The roofs were typically steeply pitched, covered with wooden shingles or thatch, allowing for efficient drainage of rain and melting snow. Firewood stacking regulations were especially important during the colder months, as a longhouse would often serve as the center of both domestic life and communal activities. The hearth, typically located in the center of the longhouse, was crucial for cooking and heating. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Lanse Meadows in Newfoundland and Gokstad in Norway reveals that the hearth was not only a source of warmth but also an important social gathering point. To ensure an adequate supply of firewood, Vikings utilized specific stacking techniques. Firewood was often split into uniform sizes, typically around 30 centimeters in length, to ensure efficient burning. This size allowed for easy handling and optimal airflow between logs, enhancing combustion efficiency. Vikings were known to stack their firewood in a way that promoted drying, an essential factor in maintaining the wood's combustibility. Stack designs varied, but a typical method involved creating a crisscross pattern to allow air circulation, which could significantly reduce moisture content. In terms of measurements, a typical household might require anywhere from 15 to 25 cubic meters of firewood annually. This estimation is based on the heating needs of a longhouse, which could house multiple families or extended kin groups. To manage this resource effectively, Viking communities would often designate specific areas for firewood collection and storage, ensuring a sustainable approach to forest management. Regulations governing these practices were likely passed down through oral traditions and reinforced by communal consensus. The importance of firewood and its management can also be seen in the organization of Viking settlements, where longhouses were often positioned near woodlands to facilitate easy access to timber. For example, in the settlement of Kviteseid in Norway, archaeological surveys reveal that longhouses were strategically located within a short distance from both farming lands and forests, optimizing resource availability. Historically, the Viking approach to longhouse construction was influenced by their climatic environment and available resources. The harsh Scandinavian climate, characterized by long winters and short summers, necessitated robust, well-insulated structures. This led to the development of the longhouse, which utilized thick wooden walls and a central hearth to retain heat. Moreover, The architectural design of longhouses evolved over time, influenced by contact with other cultures through trade and exploration. For instance, as Vikings traveled and settled in places such as the British Isles and the Mediterranean, they encountered various building techniques and materials. This interaction led to adaptations in their longhouse designs, including the incorporation of stone foundations and more elaborate roofing styles. Case studies of various Viking settlements provide further insight into the diversity of longhouse construction. At the site of Borg in the Lofoten Islands, Norway, the remains of a longhouse measuring over 83 meters in length have been uncovered, indicating a significant communal structure possibly used for feasting and gatherings. This grand longhouse featured a complex roof system that combined both timber and thatch, showcasing the Vikings' architectural ingenuity. In contrast, the longhouses found in the Danelaw region of England exhibit a blend of Viking and Anglo-Saxon architectural elements, revealing how cultural exchange influenced construction methods. These longhouses often incorporated clay and wattle techniques, which provided good insulation and further diversified the Viking architectural repertoire. In summary, the construction of Viking longhouses reflects a deep understanding of local materials, environmental conditions, and communal needs. The meticulous approach to firewood stacking and management not only reveals the practicality of Viking life but also underscores their sophisticated relationship with the natural world. As we delve into the intricacies of longhouse design and construction, we uncover a remarkable tapestry of Viking culture, resilience, and adaptability that continues to fascinate historians and archaeologists to this day. The construction methods and materials utilized in the creation of Viking longhouses are often overlooked in favor of more glamorous aspects of Viking life, such as raiding and exploration. However, the meticulous nature of longhouse construction speaks to the advanced capabilities of Viking craftsmanship. The primary materials involved in the construction of these structures included timber, thatch, and various forms of stone. Timber was predominantly sourced from local forests, with oak, Quercus robur, being the most favored due to its strength and durability. The typical dimensions of timber beams used for the frame of a longhouse ranged from 15 to 20 centimeters in width and 10 to 15 centimeters in thickness. These dimensions were deemed optimal for providing the necessary structural support while allowing for ease of handling. The length of the beams could vary significantly, with some reaching lengths of up to 7 meters, depending on the specific design of the longhouse. Construction began with the selection of a suitable site, which was conducted with consideration for factors such as proximity to water sources and agricultural land. The initial phase involved clearing the ground of vegetation and leveling the area to ensure a stable foundation. The foundation itself was typically excavated to a depth of around 30 centimeters, lined with stones to create a solid base for the wooden framework. The framework was assembled using a post and beam construction technique, which involved vertical posts anchored in the ground, supporting horizontal beams. Thatching was the primary method of roofing, utilizing reeds or straw, which were abundant in the regions inhabited by the Vikings. The thatch was layered in a manner that allowed for effective water runoff while providing insulation. The average thickness of thatch on a longhouse roof typically measured between 20 to 30 centimeters, which contributed to the overall weight and stability of the structure. The maintenance of this thatching required periodic inspections and repairs, particularly after harsh weather conditions. The maintenance procedures for Viking longhouses were a reflection of the community's commitment to preserving their living spaces. Regular inspections were conducted, often on a seasonal basis, to assess the integrity of the structure. Elements such as the roof, walls, and foundation were examined for damage. In instances of damage, repairs were made using local materials, with a preference for those that matched the original construction as closely as possible. The average lifespan of a thatched roof was approximately 10 to 15 years, necessitating periodic replacement. In terms of financial records and costs associated with longhouse construction and maintenance, evidence suggests that the economic implications were significant. Historical records indicate that the average cost of constructing a longhouse in the late 10th century ranged from 50 to 100 silver coins, depending on the size and complexity of the design. A standard longhouse could accommodate several families, thereby distributing the financial burden across multiple households. The costs included materials, labor, and resources for insulation and weatherproofing. Personnel involved in the construction and maintenance of longhouses were typically skilled craftsmen, including carpenters, thatchers, and masons. The job descriptions varied. Carpenters were responsible for shaping and assembling the timber framework, utilizing tools such as axes, chisels, and saws made from iron. Thatchers were tasked with installing the roofing, often requiring significant physical labor and skill in layering the materials correctly. Masons, though less common, were involved in the construction of stone foundations, particularly in regions where timber was less accessible. Technically, Viking longhouses were remarkable not only for their size but also for their efficiency in terms of space utilization. The average longhouse measured approximately 20 to 30 meters in length and 6 to 8 meters in width. The interior was typically divided into several functional areas: living quarters, storage spaces, and areas designated for livestock. The layout allowed for the efficient use of space, facilitating both domestic activities and agricultural practices. The heating systems employed within these longhouses were central to their functionality, particularly during the harsh Scandinavian winters. A central hearth was commonly placed within the main living area, constructed from stones and clay, which served as both a cooking area and a heat source. The dimensions of these hearths varied, but they typically measured around 1 meter in diameter. While providing warmth, the hearth required regular maintenance to ensure proper ventilation and to prevent the buildup of smoke within the living quarters. The regulations surrounding firewood stacking were a matter of considerable importance to Viking communities. Firewood was a vital resource, especially during the colder months, and the manner in which it was stacked was governed by a series of local regulations. These regulations stipulated that firewood should be stacked in a manner that allowed for optimal air circulation, preventing rot and ensuring that the wood seasoned adequately before use. The ideal height for stacked firewood was approximately 1.5 meters, with a width that did not exceed 2 meters. Firewood was generally collected from local forests, and records indicate that the average household required up to 10 cubic meters of firewood per winter season. This quantity was deemed necessary to maintain warmth and facilitate cooking. The collection process involved designated personnel, often comprising able-bodied members of the community, who were tasked with gathering and transporting the wood back to the longhouse. Documentation from the period reveals that penalties were imposed for improper stacking practices, which included fines or community service for those who failed to adhere to the regulations. In conclusion, the construction, maintenance, and regulation of Viking longhouses reflect a society that valued both practical living and communal responsibility. The methods, materials, and economic implications of longhouse construction reveal a structured approach to building that was intimately connected to the daily lives of the Vikings. The personnel involved in these processes, alongside the technical specifications of the structures themselves, highlight the intricate relationship between the Vikings and their environment. Understanding these mundane yet crucial aspects of Viking life provides a deeper insight into the resilience and adaptability of this fascinating culture, which, despite its often glamorized portrayal, was grounded in the practicalities of survival and community. The construction methods and materials utilized in the creation of Viking longhouses are often overlooked in favor of more glamorous aspects of Viking life, such as raiding and exploration. However, the meticulous nature of longhouse construction speaks to the advanced capabilities of Viking craftsmanship. The primary materials involved in the construction of these structures included timber, thatch, and various forms of stone. Timber was predominantly sourced from local forests, with oak, quercus, being the most valued due to its strength and durability. In addition to oak, other types of wood used included birch, betula, pine, pinus, and spruce, picea, all of which were abundant in the Scandinavian landscape. The choice of timber was not only practical but also symbolic, as the use of sturdy materials reflected the resilience and stability the Viking people sought in their homes. The trees were typically felled during the late autumn or winter months, a time when sap levels were lower, allowing for easier handling and better preservation of the wood. The construction process began with the creation of a foundation, which was often a simple trench dug into the earth, providing a stable base for the longhouse. The walls were built using a technique known as post and beam construction. Vertical posts were set into the ground at regular intervals, and horizontal beams were then laid across these posts to form the framework. This style of construction allowed for the longhouses to be both spacious and sturdy, accommodating the needs of larger families or clans. The average longhouse measured between 15 to 30 meters in length and 5 to 8 meters in width, depending on the size of the household. Some examples have been found to extend even longer, showcasing the ambition of the builders and the resources available to them. To further enhance the structural integrity, the walls were often filled with a combination of wattle and daub, a technique involving the weaving of thin branches or twigs, wattle, together, which were then coated with a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung, daub. This provided excellent insulation against the harsh Scandinavian winters, as well as protection from the elements. Studies of archaeological sites, such as those found in the Vestfold region of Norway, reveal that these longhouses were not only functional but were also designed with an eye for aesthetics, often adorned with intricate carvings and reliefs that reflected the cultural identity of the inhabitants. The roofing of these longhouses was equally important, and thatch was a common choice, made from reeds or straw, which provided both insulation and waterproofing. The roof was typically steeply pitched to allow for snow to slide off easily, preventing the potential collapse of the structure during heavy snowfall. Historical records, including the sagas and accounts from the 9th to 11th centuries, often describe the challenges faced by the Vikings during winter months, highlighting the importance of a well-constructed home. In addition to timber and thatch, stone was utilized in certain regions, particularly where timber was scarce. For instance, in parts of Iceland, longhouses were constructed with volcanic stone, which provided durability and insulation, demonstrating the Vikings' adaptability to their environment. The use of stone foundations or lower walls, combined with timber framing above, showcased a hybrid approach to construction that was both innovative and resource efficient. Archaeological excavations at sites like L'Anse-aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, have provided valuable insights into Viking longhouse construction techniques. Dating back to around 1000 CE, this site features a series of reconstructed longhouses that reflect the traditional building methods of the Norse settlers. The intricate layout and materials used at L'Anse-aux Meadows illustrate the Vikings' ability to adapt their architectural styles to new environments, as they incorporated local materials while maintaining their distinctive longhouse design. Additionally, the social and cultural significance of longhouses cannot be understated. These structures served as more than mere shelters. They were the heart of Viking domestic life. The interior layout typically featured a central hearth for cooking and warmth, surrounded by sleeping areas for family members. The communal nature of these homes fostered strong social bonds among extended family members and served as a gathering place for community events and rituals. In summary, Viking longhouses are remarkable examples of ancient craftsmanship, showcasing a blend of functionality, adaptability, and cultural identity. The construction methods and materials employed in their creation reflect not only the practical needs of the Viking people but also their artistic sensibilities and social structures. As we continue to uncover the rich history of the Vikings, the longhouse stands as a testament to their ingenuity and resilience in the face of challenges, both environmental and social. The monotonous history of Viking Longhouse Firewood Stacking Regulations. Part 6, Regional Variations and Comparisons. The Viking Age, spanning from approximately 793 to 1066 CE, was characterized by a multitude of regional differences in firewood stacking regulations, a reflection of the diverse environmental conditions and cultural practices across Norse territories. The geographic expanse of the Viking world, from the fjords of Norway to the rugged coasts of Greenland, created a rich tapestry of firewood management practices, which, while seemingly trivial, bore significant implications for daily life. In the coastal regions of Norway, where coniferous trees, such as spruce and pine, predominated, firewood stacking regulations were primarily influenced by the need to protect the wood from marine moisture. It was commonly mandated that firewood be stacked at least a foot off the ground, often on wooden pallets or stones, to facilitate air circulation and prevent rot. These regulations were typically inscribed in local runestones and communicated orally during community gatherings, emphasizing the communal nature of resource management. Conversely, in the warmer climes of southern Sweden, where deciduous trees like oak and birch were more prevalent, firewood stacking practices exhibited a notable divergence. Here, the emphasis was less on moisture protection and more on the ease of access and usability. It was customary for households to adopt a method known as the Swedish stack, which involved creating a circular pile of firewood, spiraling upwards, allowing for rapid retrieval and an aesthetically pleasing display. Local laws, often codified in town charters, stipulated dimensions for these stacks, typically requiring a minimum height of 5 feet to prevent encroachment upon neighboring properties. In the more isolated regions of Iceland, where volcanic activity shaped both the landscape and the lives of its inhabitants, firewood stacking regulations were influenced by the scarcity of timber. As a result, the Icelandic Vikings developed intricate systems of communal wood sharing, necessitating precise regulations regarding the stacking of firewood to ensure equitable distribution. The Althing, Iceland's early legislative assembly, played a crucial role in defining these regulations, mandating that every household contribute a minimum amount of firewood to a communal stack, which was meticulously recorded on parchment scrolls. These regional variations in firewood stacking regulations serve as a fascinating lens through which to examine the adaptive strategies of Viking societies in response to their environmental and social contexts. The local customs not only facilitated efficient use of resources but also fostered a sense of identity and belonging within each community. Part 7. Evolution over different time periods. As the Viking Age unfolded, the evolution of firewood stacking regulations reflected broader societal changes, including shifts in political organization, economic structures, and technological advancements. Initially, during the early Viking Age, 793 to 850 CE, firewood stacking practices were primarily communal and informal. Families relied on oral traditions to convey the importance of proper stacking for fire efficiency and safety, often learned by observing more experienced members of the community. However, by the mid-Viking Age, 850 to 950 CE, as trade routes expanded and settlements grew more complex, a shift toward formalized regulations began to emerge. The establishment of local chieftains and the development of nascent legal systems led to a codification of firewood stacking practices. For example, in 930 CE, the first laws were recorded during the assembly of the Althing in Iceland, laying down explicit guidelines for firewood stacking height, spacing, and construction methods. These regulations were not only practical but also served to reinforce social hierarchies, as wealthier households often produced larger stacks, symbolizing their status within the community. By the late Viking Age, 950–1066 CE, the advent of Christianity played a significant role in further formalizing firewood stacking regulations. Church officials, eager to promote order and discipline, introduced stringent guidelines that dictated not only the physical parameters of firewood stacks but also the moral implications of firewood management. Theologians argued that proper stacking was a reflection of one's piety and responsibility, leading to the establishment of ecclesiastical courts that adjudicated disputes over firewood-related issues. This evolution of firewood stacking regulations over time highlights the intricate interplay between culture, religion, and resource management, illustrating how seemingly mundane practices were woven into the very fabric of Viking society. Part 8: Bureaucratic Regulations and Laws. The formalization of firewood stacking regulations led to the establishment of a bureaucratic framework that governed these practices across various Viking territories. The regulations were often codified in legal texts, which delineated specific rules regarding the dimensions, construction, and maintenance of firewood stacks. These texts were preserved in runic inscriptions, early manuscripts, and later, Christian texts, providing invaluable insight into the bureaucratic evolution of firewood management. One notable example of such regulation can be found in the Laws of Gulating, a compilation of legal codes from Norway dating back to the 13th century, which provides detailed guidelines on firewood stacking. The regulations mandated that firewood stacks be constructed at least 6 feet from the nearest building to mitigate the risk of fire spread, a precaution that was particularly relevant given the combustible nature of Viking longhouses, which were primarily built from wood and thatch. The bureaucratic oversight of firewood stacking also led to the establishment of local inspectors, known as stack wardens, who were responsible for ensuring compliance with firewood regulations. These wardens were granted the authority to impose fines on households that failed to adhere to the stacking guidelines, thus creating a system of accountability that reinforced community norms. The records of fines imposed and inspections conducted were meticulously maintained in village ledgers, which often contained detailed notations about the quality of the wood, the dimensions of the stacks, and any infractions noted during inspections. Additionally, the development of written laws and bureaucratic structures facilitated the interregional exchange of firewood stacking techniques and regulations. As Viking expeditions expanded into the British Isles and beyond, the sharing of knowledge about effective firewood management practices became integral to trade negotiations and diplomatic relations. This exchange of regulatory ideas further enriched the tapestry of firewood stacking practices across different Viking cultures and regions. Part 9: Supply Chain and Logistics. The logistics of firewood supply and distribution were critical to the functioning of Viking longhouses, particularly in regions where timber was scarce. The management of firewood logistics involved careful planning and coordination, encompassing the procurement, transportation, and storage of wood. Viking communities often engaged in cooperative wood-gathering expeditions, where groups would venture into the forests to fell trees, following established routes and employing specific techniques to minimize damage to the surrounding ecosystem. Once the wood was harvested, the transportation phase began. The use of sledges was common in winter months, enabling the efficient movement of wood across snow-covered terrain. In coastal areas, longboats played a vital role in logistics, allowing communities to transport firewood and other resources between islands and coastal settlements. The organization of these logistics was often overseen by local leaders, who coordinated efforts to ensure that each household received a fair share of firewood, adhering to established regulations about quantity and quality. Moreover, the strategic placement of firewood stacks was influenced by logistical considerations. Households were encouraged to stack firewood near the entrances of their longhouses to facilitate easy access during inclement weather. Communities developed specific stacking patterns that optimized space and airflow, allowing for quicker drying of the wood and minimizing the risk of insect infestations. The intricacies of firewood logistics were not merely about the physical movement of wood, they also encompassed social relations and community dynamics. The collective efforts required for wood gathering and stacking fostered a sense of solidarity among community members, reinforcing social bonds and shared responsibilities. Part 10: Record-Keeping Methods. The meticulous record-keeping associated with firewood stacking regulations is perhaps one of the most overlooked aspects of this mundane history. The Vikings employed various methods to document and track compliance with firewood regulations, encompassing both oral and written traditions. In the absence of a standardized writing system, early records were often kept using runes scratched onto wooden tablets or stones, detailing the dimensions of firewood stacks, the names of households, and any infractions observed. As Viking society evolved and the influence of Christian clerics grew, the methods of record-keeping became more sophisticated. Monastic scribes began to create parchment scrolls that recorded not only firewood regulations but also the broader context of resource management within the community. These scrolls often included notations about weather conditions, harvest yields, and communal events, illustrating the interconnectedness of daily life and resource management. In larger settlements, communal ledgers were maintained, providing a comprehensive overview of firewood stocks and compliance rates. These ledgers often featured detailed charts and diagrams illustrating the proper stacking methods, serving as both instructional material and a record of adherence to regulations. The meticulous nature of these records underscores the importance placed on firewood management in Viking society, illustrating how even the most mundane aspects of daily life were subject to careful scrutiny and documentation. As the Viking Age transitioned into the Middle Ages, the advent of more formalized bureaucratic systems led to the creation of centralized record-keeping practices. Local administrators began to compile firewood-related data into regional archives, which facilitated the comparison of practices across different territories. This shift not only enhanced the efficiency of firewood management but also contributed to the development of a more cohesive Viking identity, as shared practices and regulations became a point of cultural pride. In conclusion, the history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations is a testament to the complexity of resource management within Viking society. Through regional variations, the evolution of practices over time, the establishment of bureaucratic regulations, logistical considerations, and meticulous record-keeping, the seemingly mundane task of stacking firewood reveals a rich narrative woven into the very fabric of Viking life. This narrative serves not only as a reflection of their resourcefulness but also as an enduring legacy of a culture deeply attuned to the rhythms of their environment. ### The monotonous history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations. ### Part 7, Regional Variations and Comparisons. As we delve into the regional variations of firewood stacking regulations amongst Viking longhouses, it becomes evident that geographical distinctions played a pivotal role in shaping these mundane practices. The Norse territories spanned a diverse range of environments, from the lush forests of southern Norway to the sparse, rocky outcrops of Greenland, resulting in a fascinating array of firewood-related customs and codes. In the southern regions, where timber was abundant, one could observe a tendency towards elaborate stacking methodologies. The historical records from the town of Ovaldsens, for instance, describe a practice known as the tiered stack, where firewood was organized into ascending layers, each separated by small stones to enhance airflow. Such a technique not only facilitated optimal dryness but also showcased the stack's aesthetic appeal, a subtle nod to the Viking appreciation for craftsmanship in all facets of life. Contrastingly, in the more desolate regions such as Iceland and Greenland, firewood was a precious commodity often sourced from driftwood washed ashore. The regulations here lean towards minimalism. Stacks were typically low and wide to minimize the risk of collapse due to the strong coastal winds. The notable absence of elaborate stacking patterns reflected a pragmatic approach to resource management, emphasizing functionality over aesthetics. Furthermore, the Scandinavian peninsula exhibited variations in firewood stacking based on local customs and societal structures. In the region now known as Sweden, for example, various clans adhered to unique stacking conventions that were often passed down through generations. These familial traditions dictated not only the physical arrangement of the wood but also the inclusion of specific flora, such as birch leaves, interspersed among the logs, believed to impart good fortune and ward off ill spirits. #######Part 8, Evolution over different time periods. The evolution of firewood stacking regulations is not merely a study of regional distinctions but also a chronicle of temporal shifts. As we navigate through the annals of history, one observes that the Viking Age, spanning approximately from 793 to 1066 CE, marked a period of significant development in the codification of stacking practices. Initially, during the early Viking Age, firewood stacking was largely an informal affair, dictated by individual preference and necessity. In archaeological findings from sites such as Lons Meadows, traces of firewood piles suggest a haphazard approach, with logs scattered without any discernible order. However, as communities grew more complex and trade networks expanded, a gradual shift occurred towards more standardized regulations. By the late Viking Age, the advent of written records and the influence of Christianity introduced a new layer of bureaucratic oversight. A notable example can be found in the Gulating Law, codified around the 10th century, which included stipulations regarding the proper arrangement of firewood in longhouses. These laws, while often vague, established a baseline for firewood dimensions, spacing, and the necessity of keeping the stacks at least 3 paces from the dwelling to prevent pest infestations, a regulation that would later evolve into more stringent agricultural codes. In the post-Viking era, as Norse societies transitioned into the medieval period, the stacking regulations became further formalized. The move towards feudalism brought about an increased emphasis on resource management, leading to more intricate laws governing firewood procurement and storage. The introduction of guilds also played a role, as woodworkers began to promote best practices for stacking, often documented in the guild records for posterity. ###Part 9, Bureaucratic Regulations and Laws. The rise of bureaucratic regulations surrounding firewood stacking is a testament to the Viking penchant for order amidst their often tumultuous lives. These regulations can be explored through various legal codes that surfaced throughout the Viking Age and beyond. As previously mentioned, the Gulating Law was one of the earliest comprehensive legal documents that addressed firewood stacking. However, it was not the only one. The Frosting Law, established in the 11th century, further refined the regulations by introducing penalties for improper stacking methods. For instance, if a villager's stack collapsed and caused damage to neighboring property, they could be fined a specific number of sheep or goats, a significant financial burden in a society largely dependent on livestock. Such laws reinforced the communal aspect of resource management, as the safety and well-being of the entire community hinged on the proper handling of firewood. Moreover, the role of local chieftains and their appointed overseers became crucial in enforcing these regulations. They were tasked with conducting inspections of firewood stacks, ensuring compliance with established norms. Records indicate that these officials were known as wood wardens, and their responsibilities extended beyond mere oversight. They were also responsible for educating the populace on best practices for firewood storage. The bureaucratic nature of these regulations often reflected the socio-political climate of the time. In periods of peace, regulations tended to be more lenient, allowing for individual expression in stacking methods. Conversely, during times of conflict or scarcity, rules were tightened, with an emphasis on efficiency and resource maximization. Part 10, Supply Chain and Logistics. The logistics of firewood supply and its corresponding regulations are a fascinating yet often overlooked aspect of Viking life. The procurement, transportation, and storage of firewood were matters of paramount importance, as the long harsh winters necessitated a reliable and abundant fuel source. In regions where trees were plentiful, such as the forests of eastern Norway, communities often established communal woodlands, known as skog, where villagers could collectively harvest timber. The regulations governing these communal areas included stipulations on the types of trees that could be cut and the seasons during which harvesting was permissible. For example, birch wood, known for its quick-burning properties, was often reserved for winter, while denser hardwoods like oak were left for summer use to allow for optimal seasoning. Transportation of firewood also presented logistical challenges. In many cases, longboats were used to ferry logs from harvesting sites to longhouses. The records from the sagas illustrate the laborious process of loading and unloading wood. It was not uncommon for entire communities to participate in these endeavors, reinforcing social bonds through shared labor. Once the firewood reached the longhouse, the stacking process was critical. Regulations mandated that wood must be stacked in a manner that allowed for air circulation, thus preventing rot and promoting dryness. The strategic placement of logs, often described in detail in various historical texts, ensured that the wood remained usable throughout the winter months. Part 11, Record-keeping methods. The meticulous record-keeping surrounding firewood stacking regulations is indicative of the Vikings' broader approach to governance and resource management. While much of the Viking Age existed before the widespread use of written language, the advent of runes provided a means for recording essential practices. In the Viking longhouses, wooden tablets inscribed with runes often served as reminders for stacking protocols. These tablets would be hung near the firewood storage area, allowing villagers to reference them easily. The inscriptions detailed not only the regulations but also seasonal reminders, such as when to rotate the wood to ensure even drying. In later periods, with the establishment of Christian monasteries, the art of record-keeping became more sophisticated. Monks meticulously documented firewood usage in ledger books, tracking the amount of wood consumed per household and recording any discrepancies in compliance with the established regulations. These records also served a dual purpose. They provided valuable insight into seasonal consumption patterns and emerged as a tool for taxation as the nascent state sought to exert control over resources. The evolution of record-keeping practices mirrored advancements in broader societal practices, reflecting an increasing reliance on documentation to maintain order. As we transition into the late medieval period, one observes the emergence of more formalized bureaucratic systems, where firewood records became integral to local governance. Conclusion. In summary, the history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations is a tapestry woven from the threads of regional variation, temporal evolution, bureaucratic oversight, logistical concerns, and meticulous record-keeping. Each aspect contributes to a deeper understanding of the mundane yet vital practices that sustained Viking communities through harsh winters and fostered a sense of order and communal responsibility. As we reflect on these regulations, we are reminded of the significance of even the most seemingly trivial aspects of daily life, which collectively formed the backbone of Viking society. The history of firewood stacking may appear monotonous, yet it serves as an enduring testament to the Vikings' resilience, ingenuity, and commitment to community welfare. The monotonous history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations. Part 8: Regional Variations and Comparisons. The history of firewood stacking regulations within Viking longhouses reveals a tapestry of regional variations that reflect local environmental conditions, available resources, and cultural practices. Across the expanse of Scandinavia, from the coastal fringes of Norway to the inland valleys of Sweden and the rugged terrains of Denmark, the methods employed in the stacking of firewood varied considerably, influenced by both geography and social structures. In Norway, where the rugged fjords and mountainous terrain dictated a lifestyle heavily reliant on the surrounding forestry, regulations often mandated the stacking of firewood in a manner that optimized ventilation and accessibility. For instance, it was common practice to employ a technique known as the open stack, which involved arranging logs in a manner that allowed for air circulation, thus minimizing moisture retention. This method was particularly crucial in the soggy climate of western Norway, where the persistent rainfall could lead to rapid wood degradation if not properly managed. Conversely, in the more temperate regions of southern Sweden, regulations tended to emphasize aesthetics alongside practicality. The neat stack method involved arranging firewood in uniform rows, often with decorative elements such as the use of birch bark to bind the logs together. This not only facilitated the drying process but also served as a status symbol, as a well-stacked pile could denote a family's wealth and standing within the community. The juxtaposition of functionality and decorum in Swedish firewood stacking practices exemplified the region's cultural ethos, where the mundane intersected with the artistic. In Denmark, the flatlands and extensive arable farming practices resulted in a different approach to firewood storage. Regulations often dictated that firewood be stacked in proximity to the longhouse but elevated from the ground to prevent moisture seepage. The use of wooden pallets or stone platforms became a common practice, reflecting an adaptation to the local climate and soil conditions. Furthermore, the Danes introduced an intriguing variation known as the firewood hut, a small structure designed explicitly for the storage of logs, which provided both shelter from the elements and a central location for community firewood sharing. Part 9: Evolution over different time periods. The evolution of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations is not merely a static narrative, it is one that shifts and transforms across various historical epochs. During the early Viking Age, circa 793 to 1066, the focus was primarily on basic survival needs. Firewood was stacked haphazardly, reflecting the urgency of maintaining warmth and cooking capabilities. However, as the Viking Age progressed into the later stages, particularly during the 10th and 11th centuries, a gradual refinement in stacking practices became evident. The introduction of more sophisticated agricultural techniques and the establishment of trade routes prompted a shift in societal structure. As wealth accumulated, the need for more organized and regulated firewood management emerged. This period saw the first codifications of stacking regulations, often inscribed on wooden tablets or passed down orally through generations. The emphasis on efficiency and accessibility became paramount, with regulations stipulating specific dimensions for stacked wood and the distance required between stacks to prevent fire hazards. By the time of the late Viking Age, social stratification had further influenced firewood regulations. The elite class began to establish private woodlands, necessitating policies that protected these resources from overharvesting. This resulted in a more bureaucratic approach to firewood stacking, where permits were required for wood collection, and penalties were imposed for non-compliance. The intertwining of legal frameworks with everyday practices marked a significant transformation in the cultural perception of firewood management. Part 10: Bureaucratic Regulations and Laws. As Viking society evolved, so too did the bureaucratic apparatus that governed firewood stacking regulations. The emergence of local chieftains and the establishment of thing assemblies led to the codification of laws concerning firewood management. These regulations, while often mundane in nature, played a critical role in maintaining social order and resource sustainability. The earliest documented regulations can be traced back to the mid-10th century, where local laws mandated the proper distance between stacked firewood and living structures to minimize fire risk. Detailed legislative texts outlined penalties for non-compliance, including fines or mandatory community service in the form of firewood collection for the public good. The enforcement of these laws fell to local leaders, who were responsible for conducting periodic inspections of firewood stacks. In addition to local governance, interregional councils began to form, leading to the development of more standardized regulations across various Viking territories. The Firewood Code of the North, established in the late 11th century, served as a unifying framework that guided firewood stacking practices across Scandinavia. This code included specifications on the types of wood permitted for heating, the maximum height of stacks, and recommendations for seasonal rotation of firewood to ensure optimal dryness. The bureaucratic layers of governance surrounding firewood management exemplified the complexities of Viking society, where even the most mundane aspects of daily life were subject to regulation and oversight. Part 11: Supply Chain and Logistics. The logistics of firewood supply and distribution in Viking communities reveal a fascinating intertwining of local economies and community interdependence. Firewood was not merely a personal commodity but often a communal resource, necessitating a complex web of supply chains that ensured its availability throughout the harsh winters. At the community level, the harvesting of firewood typically involved a collective effort during the autumn months. Villagers would gather to fell trees, often guided by community elders who possessed knowledge of sustainable practices. The logistics of transportation were rudimentary yet effective. Logs were rolled or dragged to designated stacking areas using sledges or simple wooden carts. The communal nature of this process fostered social bonds and reinforced the importance of cooperation in resource management. Trade networks also played a vital role in the supply chain of firewood. As Viking explorers ventured beyond their homelands, they established trade routes that allowed for the exchange of not just goods, but also knowledge regarding firewood management practices. Certain woods, such as oak and ash, were prized for their burning qualities and became valuable trade items. The logistics of transporting these resources across vast distances highlighted the sophistication of Viking trade practices, where even mundane items like firewood were integrated into a broader economic framework. Additionally, the advent of maritime transport facilitated the movement of firewood between coastal and inland communities. Longships equipped with cargo holds allowed for the efficient transport of firewood to regions where wood was scarce due to deforestation or overharvesting. This interregional trade not only ensured a steady supply of firewood but also led to the sharing of stacking techniques and regulations, further enriching the cultural tapestry of Viking society. Part 12: Record-keeping methods. The meticulous nature of Viking society extended to their methods of record-keeping concerning firewood stacking regulations. While the Vikings are often romanticized for their seafaring exploits, they also possessed a keen understanding of the necessity for documentation in maintaining social order. The earliest forms of record-keeping were likely oral traditions, where community elders would pass down knowledge regarding firewood management through storytelling. However, as societies became more complex, the need for written records emerged. The introduction of runic inscriptions on wooden tablets marked a significant advancement in documentation practices. These inscriptions often contained regulations regarding the stacking of firewood, including specifications on dimensions, distances, and seasonal guidelines. By the late Viking Age, the establishment of more formalized administrative practices led to the creation of ledgers and scrolls that systematically documented firewood regulations. Scribes, often trained in religious institutions, were tasked with recording these regulations, ensuring their preservation for future generations. The use of parchment and ink allowed for greater durability in record keeping, although the availability of these materials was limited and often reserved for more significant legal documents. In addition to official records, community members would often maintain personal logs to track their firewood consumption and procurement. These logs would detail the amount of wood collected, the type of wood used, and any pertinent regulations followed during stacking. The practice of keeping such records not only facilitated compliance with local laws but also served as an important tool in educating younger generations about the significance of proper firewood management. In conclusion, the history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations is a reflection of the intricate interplay between environmental adaptation, social structure, and bureaucratic governance. The regional variations and comparisons highlight the nuances of local customs, while the evolution over time illustrates the growing complexity of Viking society. The bureaucratic regulations and laws governing firewood management underscore the importance placed on resource sustainability, and the supply chain logistics reveal the interconnectedness of communities. Finally, the record-keeping methods employed by the Vikings serve as a testament to their commitment to preserving knowledge and ensuring compliance with communal standards. As we delve deeper into this seemingly mundane aspect of Viking life, we uncover a rich narrative that speaks to the resilience, ingenuity, and enduring legacy of this remarkable civilization. The monotonous history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations. Part 9: Regional Variations and Comparisons. The regulations surrounding the stacking of firewood in Viking longhouses exhibited considerable regional variation, reflective of the diverse environments and cultural practices across the Nordic territories. In the icy fjords of Norway, for instance, firewood stacking was highly influenced by the prevalence of spruce and pine, which were abundant in the region but had differing burning qualities. Norwegians favored a method known as the fjord stack, wherein logs were arranged in a triangular formation, maximizing airflow and minimizing moisture retention. This method was particularly effective in the damp conditions often prevalent in coastal areas, where the humidity could lead to rapid decay if wood was not adequately ventilated. Conversely, in the more arid regions of Sweden, where birch and aspen were the dominant species, the stacking regulations took a different form. The Swedish lean, an innovative approach where firewood was stacked at a slight angle against a sturdy wall, was developed to facilitate quick drying and ease of access during the harsh winters. This method not only allowed for rapid retrieval of firewood but also took advantage of the sun's limited rays, further aiding in drying the wood. Furthermore, the inhabitants of the Danish Isles adopted a rather idiosyncratic approach, known as the crown stack, where logs were piled in a conical shape with a wider base. This design was not only aesthetically pleasing but also served a functional purpose, as it allowed for the efficient use of space in smaller longhouses. The design facilitated better air circulation while also serving as a natural deterrent against pests, a concern that was particularly relevant given the proximity of the wood stacks to living spaces. Part 10: Evolution over different time periods. As Viking society evolved from the early medieval period into the late Viking Age, so too did the regulations regarding firewood stacking. Initially, the guidelines were informal, often passed down orally through generations. However, As Viking settlements grew in size and complexity, particularly following the establishment of trade routes and settlements in the British Isles and beyond, the need for more formalized regulations became evident. By the 10th century, as Viking culture began to amalgamate with that of neighboring regions, we see the emergence of more codified practices. The introduction of the Logbook of Stacking in 950 AD marked a significant turning point. This document outlined specific parameters regarding the dimensions of stacked wood, the spacing between logs, and the preferred types of firewood for various seasons. This era also witnessed the rise of communal stacking spaces, where entire communities would gather to stack firewood, leading to a standardization of practices and the sharing of innovative techniques. By the 12th century, with the onset of feudalism and the establishment of local chieftains, firewood stacking regulations became intertwined with the bureaucratic structures that governed Viking society. Local lords began to enforce laws regarding firewood, seeing it as not only a resource vital for survival but also an economic commodity. This period saw the introduction of fines for improper stacking, which served to reinforce the importance of adherence to these regulations. Part 11: Bureaucratic Regulations and Laws. The bureaucratization of firewood stacking regulations culminated in the establishment of the Firewood Code, a comprehensive set of laws that outlined the proper methods for stacking firewood, the responsibilities of woodcutters and stackers, and the penalties for non-compliance. This code was often inscribed on wooden tablets and publicly displayed in the central square of Viking settlements, ensuring that all citizens were aware of the expectations regarding firewood management. One of the most notable aspects of the Firewood Code was its emphasis on the preservation of local ecosystems. Regulations mandated that only certain types of trees could be harvested for firewood, with specific guidelines on the sustainable rotation of woodlots to prevent overharvesting. This not only ensured a steady supply of firewood but also maintained the health of the forest ecosystems that were vital to Viking life. Moreover, the Firewood Code delineated the roles of various community members in relation to firewood stacking. The stackmaster, a position of considerable prestige within the community, was tasked with overseeing the proper implementation of stacking regulations. The stackmaster was responsible for conducting inspections of firewood stacks and reporting any violations to the local lord, who would then impose penalties ranging from fines to mandatory community service. Part 12: Supply Chain and Logistics. The logistics of firewood supply in Viking society were complex and multifaceted. Firewood was not merely a personal resource, it was an integral part of the broader economic system. The procurement of firewood involved a multi-tiered supply chain that included various stakeholders, from woodcutters to stackers, and even the overseers who enforced stacking regulations. Initially, firewood was typically sourced from local forests, where families would engage in communal cutting events known as woodcutters' gatherings. During these gatherings, individuals would work together to fell trees, transport them back to their longhouses, and subsequently stack them according to the established regulations. This practice fostered a sense of community and shared responsibility, as everyone relied on the collective efforts to ensure an adequate supply of firewood. However, as Viking trade expanded, particularly during the latter half of the Viking Age, the demand for firewood began to shift. Increased interactions with other cultures led to a burgeoning market for firewood, with longhouses in urban centers requiring greater quantities than could be sustainably sourced from nearby forests. Consequently, a network of traders emerged, specializing in the acquisition and distribution of firewood. These traders often traveled great distances to procure high-quality firewood, particularly from regions known for specific types of wood, such as the prized oak from southern Sweden. The logistics of transporting firewood were no small feat. Longships, designed for speed and agility, were often repurposed for transporting bulk goods, including firewood, across waterways. The loading and unloading processes were governed by strict regulations to ensure that the wood remained dry and free from pests during transit. Specific techniques were employed to stack firewood within the ships, often resembling the methods used in longhouse stacking, thus maintaining the integrity of the wood during transport. Part 13: Record-Keeping Methods. The importance of meticulous record-keeping in relation to firewood stacking regulations cannot be overstated. As Viking society became increasingly bureaucratic, the methods of documenting firewood transactions and compliance with stacking regulations evolved in tandem. Early practices relied heavily on oral traditions, with elders often serving as the primary record keepers. This informal method, while effective in small communities, proved inadequate as settlements grew and regulations became more complex. By the 11th century, written records began to emerge, with specific emphasis on the quantity and type of firewood stacked by each household. Scribes were employed to document compliance with the firewood code, creating detailed logs that noted the dimensions of stacks, the types of wood used, and the date of stacking. These logs were often kept in communal granaries or longhouses to ensure easy access for inspections by the stackmaster. The advent of runic writing further transformed record-keeping practices. Wooden tablets inscribed with runes became a common medium for documenting firewood transactions, particularly in larger settlements. This practice not only facilitated easier tracking of compliance but also allowed for the preservation of knowledge across generations. The tablets often included illustrations of proper stacking techniques, serving as a visual guide for those who may have been illiterate. In addition to tablet records, the Vikings utilized a method known as the stacker's ledger, a community-maintained book that documented the history of firewood stacking within a settlement. This ledger included entries for each household, detailing the amount of firewood stacked, any relevant fines or penalties incurred, and even notes on the quality of wood used. This comprehensive approach to record-keeping ensured accountability and transparency within communities, fostering a culture of compliance with firewood stacking regulations. Conclusion. In summary, the history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations is a rich tapestry woven with regional variations, bureaucratic evolution, logistical challenges, and meticulous record-keeping practices. From the early informal traditions to the establishment of the Firewood Code, these regulations reflect the adaptability and resilience of Viking society. The seemingly mundane topic of firewood stacking reveals a complex interplay of cultural practices, economic considerations, and environmental stewardship that highlights the sophistication of Viking civilization. As we delve deeper into this monotonous yet fascinating history, it becomes evident that even the most mundane aspects of life can illuminate the intricacies of a society's values, priorities, and innovations. Part 10: Regional Variations and Comparisons. The history of Viking Longhouse Firewood stacking regulations is not a monolithic narrative but rather a tapestry woven with regional differences that reflect the diverse environmental and cultural landscapes across Scandinavia and adjacent territories. The manner in which firewood was stacked, stored, and utilized varied significantly, influenced by factors such as the availability of timber, local customs, and climatic conditions. In the coastal regions of Norway, for instance, where the sea provided both sustenance and access to trade, firewood stacking regulations were often intertwined with maritime practices. The abundance of driftwood, a readily available resource washed ashore by the relentless waves, led to distinct stacking methodologies. Local communities developed a technique known as the driftwood pyramid, where logs were arranged in a conical form, facilitating air circulation and ensuring efficient drying. This method was not merely aesthetic, it played a crucial role in maintaining the quality of the wood, which, when properly dried, yielded a hotter and more consistent flame. Contrastingly, in the densely forested regions of Sweden, where timber was plentiful, the regulations surrounding firewood stacking took on a different character. Here, the focus was less on the preservation of scarce resources and more on the efficiency of storage. The practice known as log layering became prominent, where logs were stacked in long rows, often elevated on wooden slats to prevent moisture absorption from the ground. These regulations were codified in local laws, emphasizing the importance of uniformity in height and spacing to optimize airflow and reduce the risk of pest infestations. In Denmark, where agricultural practices dominated the landscape, firewood stacking regulations were often dictated by the dual needs of farming and heating. The tradition of crop rotation stacking emerged, where firewood was interspersed with agricultural products, such as straw or hay, to create a mixed stack that served both as fuel and as a barrier against moisture. This practice not only maximized space but also ensured that the firewood remained dry, as the insulating properties of the agricultural materials helped to shield the wood from the elements. Part 11: Evolution over different time periods. As Viking society evolved, so too did the regulations governing firewood stacking. The transition from the early Viking Age, circa 793–1066 CE, to the late Viking Age saw significant shifts not only in societal structure but also in the technological advancements that influenced firewood management. During the early Viking Age, the approach to firewood stacking was largely informal and guided by communal knowledge passed down through generations. The focus was on practicality, how to stack wood effectively for immediate use rather than adhering to a formalized set of regulations. However, as Viking settlements expanded and became more structured, particularly with the establishment of trading hubs like Birka and Hedeby, the need for standardized practices became apparent. By the late Viking Age, as trade and commerce flourished, the implications of firewood stacking extended beyond mere domestic considerations. It became a matter of economic efficiency and resource management. The introduction of regulations concerning the dimensions of stacked wood, such as the enforced standard length of logs, approximately 3 feet, depending on regional variations, was indicative of a society increasingly concerned with maximizing available resources for both heating and trade. This period also marked the introduction of record-keeping methods that documented firewood supply and consumption. Such records were not merely for the benefit of individual households but were integrated into larger economic systems. Town councils and local chieftains began to maintain logs detailing the quantity and quality of firewood available in public storage, which was crucial for ensuring that communal heating needs were met, especially during harsh winters. Part 12: Bureaucratic Regulations and Laws. As Viking societies transitioned towards greater complexity and hierarchy, the bureaucratic regulations surrounding firewood stacking began to formalize. The establishment of local laws, often inscribed on wooden tablets or carved into stones, delineated the responsibilities of individuals concerning firewood management. One notable regulation was the Firewood Act of 978, enacted in a council meeting at the Thing, the traditional assembly, in what is now Norway. This act stipulated that all households must stack their firewood in accordance with specific guidelines: a minimum height of 4 feet, a maximum width of 6 feet, and a requirement that stacks be placed at least 10 feet away from any structure to mitigate fire hazards. Violators faced penalties, including fines or mandatory community service in the form of firewood collection for those less fortunate. In Scandinavian towns, where the population density was higher, regulations became even more intricate. Local authorities mandated that firewood be inspected regularly to ensure compliance. Inspectors, often appointed from among the community's most respected elders, would measure stacks and issue compliance certificates. This practice not only reinforced community standards but also fostered a sense of collective responsibility for resource management. Furthermore, the bureaucratic structure expanded to include the regulation of trade in firewood. Merchants involved in the sale of timber were required to adhere to strict guidelines regarding the sourcing and stacking of wood. Regulations stipulated that firewood sold in markets must be stacked in clearly defined units, known as cords, with each cord representing a specific volume. This standardization not only facilitated trade but also ensured that consumers received a fair quantity of wood, free from the risk of fraud often associated with informal trade practices. Part 13: Supply Chain and Logistics. The logistics of firewood supply and distribution in Viking society were intrinsically linked to the broader economic framework of the period. The procurement, transportation, and storage of firewood involved a complex network of practices that ensured households had adequate supplies throughout the year. Timber harvesting generally occurred in the autumn months, coinciding with the end of the agricultural cycle. Communities organized collective efforts to fell trees, with specific roles assigned to individuals based on skill and age. Young men often took on the physically demanding task of cutting and transporting logs, while women and children were typically responsible for stacking the wood in designated areas. Transportation methods varied depending on geography. In regions with navigable rivers, logs were often floated downstream on rafts, a practice known as log driving. This method allowed for the efficient movement of large quantities of timber over vast distances. In contrast, in more rugged terrains, logs were carried on sledges pulled by oxen or horses, a labor-intensive process that required careful planning and coordination. Once transported to a central location, firewood was typically stored in communal wood sheds, which served as both storage and distribution centers. These sheds were often strategically placed to maximize accessibility and minimize the risk of theft. The stacking within these sheds adhered to communal regulations, ensuring that all members had fair access to wood supplies throughout the winter months. As trade networks expanded, the logistics of firewood became even more intricate. Firewood was not only a domestic necessity but also a commodity in trading exchanges, particularly in urban centers where demand surged. Merchants developed sophisticated systems for tracking supply routes and inventory levels, often employing rudimentary forms of bookkeeping to monitor the flow of timber. Such records included notations of the source of the wood, the quantity received, and the date of stacking, which allowed for better resource allocation. Part 14: Record-Keeping Methods. Record-keeping in the context of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations is a fascinating study of practicality intersecting with the need for governance and community welfare. As the complexity of Viking society increased, so too did the methods by which they documented their activities related to firewood management. Initially, record-keeping was an informal affair, relying heavily on oral traditions and communal memory. However, as literacy began to spread, particularly among the elite and those involved in trade, methods of documentation evolved. Wooden tablets, often inscribed with runes, became a common medium for recording firewood regulations and household inventories. These tablets were often stored in communal spaces, where they could be referenced during communal meetings or disputes. During the late Viking Age, the advent of parchment and ink allowed for more durable and portable records. Official documents concerning firewood regulations were often elaborately crafted, with illustrations depicting proper stacking methods and detailed descriptions of local laws. Town scribes, tasked with the responsibility of maintaining these records, became vital figures in ensuring compliance with firewood regulations. Their meticulous attention to detail often included not only the quantity and quality of stacked wood but also the names of households, thereby fostering accountability within the community. Moreover, the introduction of ledgers enabled households to keep track of their own firewood consumption. These ledgers recorded the date of collection, the source of the wood, and any relevant notes regarding quality or condition. Families often passed these records down through generations, creating a lineage of wood management that underscored the importance of firewood not just as a resource but as a cornerstone of familial legacy. Through these evolving methods of record-keeping, Viking society demonstrated a remarkable understanding of resource management and communal responsibility, ensuring that the legacy of firewood stacking regulations would endure through the ages. Conclusion. The intricate history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations provides a profound insight into the societal structures, environmental interactions, and economic practices of the Viking Age. Through regional variations, bureaucratic evolution, logistical considerations, and meticulous record-keeping methods, we glimpse a complex web of practices that, while seemingly mundane, speak volumes about the values and priorities of a culture that thrived in some of the harshest climates of Northern Europe. This meticulous documentation of an ostensibly straightforward task reveals a society deeply attuned to the rhythms of nature and the imperatives of community, ensuring that the legacy of their firewood stacking regulations remains a testament to Viking ingenuity and perseverance. ### The monotonous history of Viking Longhouse Firewood stacking regulations. ### Introduction to Viking Longhouse construction and firewood needs. In the vast and complex tapestry of Viking society, the longhouse stands as a significant architectural achievement. These elongated structures, often built from timber and turf, served as homes for extended families, workshops, and storage areas. Central to the longhouse's function was the need for firewood, which was essential for heating, cooking, and crafting activities. The regulations governing the stacking of firewood, while seemingly mundane, reveal much about Viking social organization, resource management, and daily life. ### The role of minor historical figures in firewood regulations. To fully understand the intricacies of Viking firewood stacking protocols, it is imperative to shed light on the minor historical figures who influenced these regulations. Although not as celebrated as the renowned kings and warriors of the Viking Age, local chieftains and community leaders played pivotal roles in establishing firewood stacking norms within their settlements. For instance, one such figure, Gernbjarnardóttir, a local chieftainess in the late 9th century, is documented to have taken a keen interest in the proper arrangement of firewood. According to local sagas, she issued a decree, "Let the firewood be stacked in a manner befitting the gods, for the warmth of our homes is the warmth of our spirits." This quote, while fictional, epitomizes the reverence Vikings held for both fire and order in their domestic spaces. Similarly, Sigurd the Steady, a lesser-known lawman from a small fjord community, is said to have introduced a regulation that mandated firewood stacking to be at least 2 meters away from the longhouse walls to prevent pest infestations and decay. His contributions, albeit overshadowed by more prominent figures, were crucial in laying down the foundations of firewood management practices. ### Specific case studies of firewood stacking regulations. To illustrate the evolution of firewood stacking regulations, we can explore specific case studies from various Viking settlements. Take, for example, the settlement at Lonseux Meadows, established around 1000 AD. Archaeological findings indicate that the inhabitants stacked their firewood in a neat, vertical manner, which not only optimized space but also facilitated air circulation to promote drying. In contrast, the settlement of Kaupang, operational from the late 8th century to the 10th century, displayed a more haphazard approach to firewood stacking. Evidence suggests that firewood was often piled chaotically against the walls of longhouses, leading to numerous instances of mold growth and wood decay. This practice, while less efficient, can be attributed to the settlement's rapid growth and the consequent scarcity of available space. Local sagas document this chaotic stacking as a point of contention, with the saying, "A stacked mess is a house of distress," emerging in popular vernacular. Another notable case study is the small island community of Jarg, where the local assembly, Ing, held a meeting in 970 AD to address the dire need for efficient firewood management. The resolution passed mandated that all households adhere to a specific stacking height of no more than 3 meters. The rationale was twofold: to prevent the risk of fire hazards and to ensure equitable distribution of firewood among households. The minutes from this assembly, while largely lost to history, are believed to have included the statement, "Let us not allow our fires to consume our homes, instead, let them illuminate our lives." Comparative analysis with other regions. When comparing Viking firewood stacking regulations with those from contemporary societies, particularly in medieval Europe, distinct differences emerge. In the Anglo-Saxon regions, for instance, firewood stacking was often regulated by the Church, which emphasized the spiritual implications of maintaining a clean and orderly household. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records several instances where village priests would conduct inspections of firewood stacks, warning of divine retribution for poorly stacked wood. A typical admonition was, "He who stacks his wood askew shall invite chaos upon his hearth." In contrast, Viking regulations were more pragmatic, focusing on the utility and efficiency of firewood storage rather than religious implications. The Vikings, known for their practical approach to life, preferred regulations that enhanced daily living rather than those grounded in spiritual beliefs. In the Mediterranean regions, such as in parts of Italy and Greece, firewood stacking regulations were less formalized. This was largely due to the availability of different types of fuel, such as olive oil and dried herbs, which lessened the reliance on firewood for cooking and heating. Consequently, the Mediterranean cultures developed a more laissez-faire attitude towards firewood storage, often resulting in informal practices guided by local customs rather than codified laws. Archaeological findings and interpretations. Archaeological excavations have unearthed a wealth of information regarding Viking firewood stacking practices. At sites like Borg in the Lofoten Islands, researchers discovered remnants of firewood stacks that displayed remarkable uniformity. These findings suggest that Viking communities placed a high value on the aesthetic and functional aspects of firewood storage. One particularly significant discovery was made in 2003 when archaeologists uncovered a longhouse that contained a meticulously stacked pile of birch wood, estimated to date back to 850 AD. The wood was arranged in such a way that it created an airflow system, promoting drying and reducing the risk of rot. This finding led to the hypothesis that the Vikings possessed a sophisticated understanding of wood preservation techniques, which was likely passed down through generations. Conversely, at the site of Gokstad, excavators found evidence of poorly stacked firewood that had led to structural damage in the longhouse. The wood was found to be infested with insects, likely due to improper storage methods. This insight underscores the importance of adherence to stacking regulations, as neglecting these practices could have dire consequences for the integrity of the home. Primary source quotations, invented but plausible. Throughout the examination of Viking firewood stacking regulations, it is essential to incorporate plausible primary source quotations that reflect the mindset of the time. One such quote attributed to a fictional Viking elder, Ragnhild the Wise, states, "A well-stacked pile of firewood is the first step to a well-ordered life. Let it be the foundation upon which we build our warmth and our stories." Another fictional account from the Saga of the Hearth, penned in the 12th century, captures the community's sentiments perfectly. "He who neglects his woodpile invites the chill of winter, for a warm hearth is the heart of a home." This quote resonates with the Viking ethos, emphasizing the importance of firewood management. Furthermore, an imagined letter from a Viking mother to her son encapsulates the practical wisdom passed down through generations. "My dear son, remember always to stack your firewood with care. For when the storms rage and the nights grow long, it is the order of your woodpile that shall keep you safe and warm." Conclusion. In conclusion, the history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations may seem tedious at first glance, but upon deeper exploration, it reveals a complex interplay of social customs, resource management, and community dynamics. Through the lens of minor historical figures, specific case studies, comparative analyses, archaeological findings, and imagined primary sources, we gain a more nuanced understanding of the significance of firewood stacking in Viking society. As we reflect on this topic, it is essential to recognize that even the most monotonous aspects of history can shed light on the values and priorities of a culture. The meticulous attention to detail in firewood stacking regulations illustrates the Vikings' commitment to practicality and community well-being, making it a topic worthy of further contemplation, albeit in a rather somnolent manner. The monotonous history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations. In the annals of Viking history, one might be tempted to overlook the intricate and often mundane aspects of daily life. However, when we delve into the specifics of firewood stacking regulations within Viking longhouses, we uncover not only a reflection of societal norms but also an insight into the minutiae of their daily existence. The regulations surrounding this practice, while seemingly trivial, reveal a great deal about the values, environmental considerations, and communal responsibilities of Viking society. Minor historical figures and their roles. To better understand the stacking regulations of firewood in Viking longhouses, it is imperative to examine the minor historical figures who influenced these practices. One such figure is Asbjorn the Wooded, a lesser-known chieftain from the late 9th century in what is now Norway. Asbjorn was renowned not only for his prowess in battle but also for his keen sense of organization regarding resource management. He is credited with an early form of documentation that outlined the methods for stacking firewood to maximize space and minimize fire hazards in longhouses. Asbjorn's contributions were pivotal in that they provided a structured approach to firewood storage, which was essential for the harsh Scandinavian winters. His regulations emphasized the importance of stacking firewood at least 3 paces away from the longhouse to prevent the risk of fire spreading to the wooden structures. This precautionary measure would later become a standard practice across Viking settlements, demonstrating that even minor historical figures could have substantial impacts on societal norms. Another notable figure is Freydis the Firekeeper, a woman who lived in the late 10th century. Friedis was tasked with overseeing the communal firewood supply in her village. She initiated the practice of categorizing firewood based on its drying time and heat output, which she documented in a series of runestones. Her influence ensured that villagers could efficiently use their limited firewood resources, especially during the winter months when access to new wood was restricted. Freydis's contributions are often cited in village meetings, where tales of her meticulous firewood management continue to be recounted, albeit in a rather tedious manner. #Specific case studies with dates. One of the most significant case studies in the history of Viking firewood stacking regulations can be traced back to the year 921 CE in the settlement of Borg, located in the Lofoten Islands. Archaeological excavations reveal that the residents of Borg adhered to specific firewood stacking guidelines that dictated the arrangement of wood based on length and type. In this settlement, it was common to stack birch wood on the bottom, as it burns quickly and is easy to ignite, while denser woods such as oak were reserved for the upper tiers of the stack, providing a longer-lasting heat source. The 921 CE regulations were meticulously recorded in what is now referred to as the Borg Codex, an ancient manuscript that detailed firewood management. The Codex outlined that firewood should be stacked with spaces in between to allow for ventilation, thereby preventing moisture accumulation, which could lead to rot. The practice of spacing was further emphasized by the phrase, "A dry stack is a warm heart," which, although dull, underscored the importance of proper stacking for communal warmth and safety. Another notable instance occurred in 1032 CE in the village of Hegra, where an unusual firewood stacking incident led to the formulation of new regulations. During a particularly harsh winter, a resident was found to have stacked firewood too close to his longhouse, resulting in a near catastrophe when sparks from the chimney ignited the wood. This incident prompted the village council to convene, where they amended existing regulations to enforce a minimum distance of 4 paces between stacked wood and the longhouse. The ensuing decree was recorded in the village annals, which are now accessible in the form of translated excerpts. "Let it be known, a stack close is a danger most vile, let our homes remain safe, for warmth is worth the while." Comparative analysis with other regions. When comparing Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations with those of other regions, particularly the Anglo-Saxon and Celtic societies, subtle differences emerge. The Anglo-Saxons, for instance, adopted a more communal approach to firewood management, often designating a wood master to oversee the collection and distribution of firewood among households. This figure was responsible for ensuring that all families received an equitable share of firewood, which was crucial during the long, cold winters of England. In contrast, Viking practices were more individualized, with each household responsible for its own firewood management. This difference can partly be attributed to the more decentralized nature of Viking society, where individual households were often isolated from one another. However, there were some shared practices, such as the necessity of keeping firewood dry and well ventilated. The Celts, on the other hand, had a unique approach that emphasized the use of specific types of wood for particular seasons. For example, they believed that using pine during the summer months was beneficial for warding off insects, while oak was preferred in winter for its long-lasting heat. This nuanced understanding of wood properties was less prevalent among the Vikings, who primarily focused on the practical aspects of stacking for efficiency and safety. Archaeological findings and interpretations. Archaeological findings related to Viking firewood stacking regulations provide a wealth of information regarding their daily lives. Excavations at sites such as the Gokstad burial mound have revealed remnants of firewood stacks that conform to the historical regulations laid out in the Borg Codex. These stacks were often found to have been constructed with alternating layers of different wood types, confirming the Vikings' understanding of the importance of heat retention and fire management. Interpretations of these findings often lead to discussions about the communal nature of firewood gathering and stacking. For instance, the presence of tools such as wooden wedges and mallets, discovered alongside firewood remains, suggests that communal efforts were often employed to prepare and stack firewood, a task that required cooperation among villagers. The repeated finding of these tools across various sites indicates that firewood management was a standardized aspect of Viking life, one that was ritualized over generations. Primary source quotations, invented but plausible. To further illustrate the significance of firewood stacking regulations, we can draw upon some invented yet plausible primary source quotations that reflect the attitudes of the time. From the Borg Codex, we find the following quote: "In the stacking of our firewood, let wisdom prevail, for it is not the height of the stack, but the heart of the hearth that keeps us warm." Furthermore, a purported speech by Asbjorn the Wooded, recorded in the annals of Viking lore, states, "Fear not the chill of winter, for a well-stacked pile shall ensure the warmth of kin and kind. Stack with care, and let no spark be the end of our hearth." These quotations, while fictional, encapsulate the ethos of Viking society regarding the importance of firewood management and the communal values that underpin their regulations. In conclusion, the history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations, while seemingly monotonous, offers a deep and often overlooked insight into the societal norms, environmental considerations, and communal responsibilities of Viking life. Through the examination of minor historical figures, case studies, comparative analyses, archaeological findings, and fictional primary sources, we gain a more exhaustive understanding of this vital aspect of their existence. As we reflect on these regulations, we are reminded that even the most mundane details of history can reveal profound truths about the lives of those who came before us. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of our soothing journey through the monotonous yet fascinating history of Viking Longhouse firewood stacking regulations. As we've wandered through the snowy landscapes of yore, we've uncovered the meticulous practices that govern the everyday lives of these remarkable seafarers and settlers. From the careful selection of timber to the strategic placement of each log, we have learned how these ancient guidelines were not merely rules, but essential components of survival and comfort in the harsh Nordic winters. We began our exploration by delving into the significance of firewood in Viking culture, where warmth and light were not just luxuries but lifelines that sustained families through long, dark nights. The rhythmic stacking of firewood became a ritual, a meditative act that connected the Vikings to their environment, as well as to one another. We've observed how these regulations, seemingly simple on the surface, revealed a deeper understanding of community, resource management, and the wisdom of generations. As we recounted tales of community gatherings where neighbors shared tips and tricks on optimal stacking methods, we felt the gentle pulse of camaraderie that flowed through those ancient longhouses. Each log stacked in perfect harmony not only provided warmth but also fostered connections that transcended time. Let us take a moment to reflect on the calm that comes with knowing that even the most mundane aspects of life can hold stories that resonate through the ages. In a world that moves ever faster, it's essential to find comfort in the steady rhythm of our daily routines, just as the Vikings did with their firewood. As you prepare to drift into a peaceful sleep, I would like to thank you for joining me on this tranquil journey. Your presence has added warmth to this exploration, and I hope it has brought you a sense of calm and relaxation. Remember, if you ever wish to revisit this serene narrative, the door is always open. You can replay this soothing history whenever you need that gentle reminder of the simplicity and beauty of a well-stacked log. So now, as you lay your head down and surrender to the embrace of sleep, may your dreams be filled with visions of peaceful longhouses, crackling fires, and the soft whispers of ancient tales. Let the weight of the day lift away, leaving you with a heart full of warmth and serenity. Good night, dear listeners. May you find rest in the gentle arms of the night, and may the stories of the past cradle you softly into a deep, rejuvenating slumber.